Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, everything's working. Well, you guys are right on time.
Hi, Chris. Good to meet
Hey,
you.
how are you? Hey, you too.
Yeah, so nice to meet you guys. Sorry, just Chris. I already know you, Jaya. Yeah, just for a quick introduction, my name is Diane. I'm the social media manager for NIM. So we don't have much people in here yet, but considering the space is going to be recorded and we have a lot of people who listen to it afterwards, I think we can get started. I'll give a quick intro for you guys first, and also for Chris, I'll give you like an intro of NIM because I understand we haven't like collaborated that much before. So yeah, hi everyone. Today we have an exciting space lined up in front of us, and we're gonna go in the world of Web3 privacy and decentralized tech. So thrilled to be here. Today's discussion is actually inspired by an article written by our Chief Strategy Officer, Jaya, who's here today, and our new content writer, Tamlin. So in that piece, Jaya basically explored the clash between privacy economics versus doom coins, snitch coins, and pocket cops. And it basically prompted a lot of reflection on how Web3 can fulfill its potential by moving away from Web2 surveillance-driven models. For NIM, in case some of you are new to NIM, we're basically a privacy-focused project in the Web3 space, aiming to build a more secure and private internet for all users. The core technology we're using is the mixnet. We call it the NIM mixnet, which is designed to provide very strong network layer privacy by obscuring IP addresses, traffic patterns for blockchain-based applications, the apps, wallets, and more. NIM is also like a transport layer of the privacy stack, and it can play a crucial role for developers as well as the general public. NIM will soon come out with VPN product, and we already have a product called NIM Connect, which can connect you to the mixnet just with one click. And we really put privacy first, and then we believe that privacy is freedom, the power. Everyone should be able to like make themselves completely be private. And yeah, so our goal is to be able to put this power into everyone's hands. So yeah, I would like to introduce our special guest for today, Chris Blec. So you describe yourself as a fierce advocate for unstoppable decentralized tech. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and what motivates your passion for this space and basically what you do and who you are?
I'm an activist for freedom and liberty and self-sovereignty, and I'm against anything that could be used to go against those things. In crypto, I'm a pretty strong advocate generally for Bitcoin, for Monero, for other crypto projects that lack the ability to turn evil due to the way that they were launched and developed. And I'm opposed to crypto projects that retain the ability to turn evil in the future or are born in a way such as Worldcoin and other related scams are born in a way where they're deceptively evil. So really at the end of the day, I'm about transparency, and like one way to look at it is decentralization versus centralization, but it's not always that clear because there's plenty of centralized things going on in the world that are completely transparent and that people know are centralized. I don't really care about that stuff as much as I care about the stuff that's trying to fake it. I think that's where the real evil lies.
Yes, I actually messaged you after I saw your views on Worldcoin, and I thought that we could have a great conversation with Jaya based on the article that she co-wrote. So yeah, Jaya, can you introduce yourself to Chris and to everyone here?
Sure. So my name is Jaya, and I'm my official title is Chief Strategy Officer at NIM, which basically is just a kind of fancy way of saying that I connect a lot of the kind of deep technical work that's happening in NIM with what's going on out there in the world. So that involves both like working very closely with our community of node operators, developers, and of course token holders, as well as like relating NIM to specific use cases and meaningful developments that are happening in the world, also in terms of media debates and debates more broadly. So I would say in terms of like evil tech and combating evil tech has probably been my initial motivation for joining the space as well. And also a lot of my work has been clarifying a lot of the misunderstandings that often circulate around the term decentralization, because it kind of becomes this like easy go-to, almost kind of like marketing word that in order for it to actually be real and be really meaningful in the sense of how decentralization interacts with power dynamics, it needs to be thought through across all layers of the stack in quite deep ways. And, of course, the question of transparency, privacy, surveillance, and this that has been, for me, a key topic to address when it comes to power dynamics in the internet today, because the surveillance business model is so baked into all of our core technologies, including what I'm calling Doomcoin and Snitchcoin, which refers to Worldcoin and Arkham, respectively. And so I'm interested in how far we can push different sets of incentives that incentivize privacy, that incentivize collaboration, that incentivize openness on the basis of privacy versus surveillance and control as the kind of core economic incentive.
Can I ask you a couple questions about NIM?
Sure.
So on your website, because I don't know anything about it, honestly, just learning now. So on the website, you're kind of comparing it to a VPN or Tor or other ways of achieving privacy on the internet, right? So, and it says that it can work with any application, any cryptocurrency, anything at all. So is NIM essentially a network of nodes, kind of like Tor, where somebody has to run a node and then somehow traffic is routed through? And how is it different from Tor?
Yeah, so the core technology of NIM is what's called a mixnet. And yes, what a mixnet does is it essentially routes your traffic through several layers of nodes, and those nodes then mix your traffic with other traffic going through the network. And that mixing kind of adds micro time delays and makes sure that the patterns of communication can't be traced. So, and the kind of main difference between, let's say, well, first of all, the difference between a VPN and a mixnet is a VPN, you're essentially trusting your VPN provider with all your information, and they can kind of dox you if they want. You have this kind of like trusted intermediary. The key difference between NIM and Tor is that Tor essentially protects for certain types of attacks, but if someone is actually watching the entire network, they can, deduce more or less, if they're looking at the kind of entry and exit points of the Tor network, then they can kind of more or less deduce who's speaking to who. Whereas with a mixnet, you can't. So even for what's called a global passive adversary, the destination and origins of messages are obscured. And we also have essentially, metadata protection as well. So not just the content of messages are obscured, but also, the size of the packets going through the mixnet, the timing of the packets, the device that you're using, the location that you're sending traffic from, and so on.
But NIM is a blockchain.
No, NIM is a mixnet, which runs on a blockchain. So what the blockchain does is the blockchain maintains the directory of nodes operating the network, and does so in a way where nodes, it's a way to make sure the directory authority is decentralized. So what that means is that anyone who's holding NIM tokens can register their node by bonding NIM tokens, which, and that all happens via a mixnet contract that runs on a blockchain, but there's no user traffic that runs through the blockchain. So it's like two separate systems is the best way to think about it. You've got the mixnet that is providing the privacy, and then you have what's called a NIX blockchain that maintains the directory of authority of the mixnet and the reward and incentive system.
So anybody can run a node?
Yep.
But validators are whitelisted on the blockchain?
Yeah, currently validators are a permission set, which are going to be permissioned over the next couple of months.
To what extent? Entirely? Anybody can run a validator in 6 months?
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for the background. And there's a token.
There's a token. So the NIM token is, it's a utility token, which basically works as a reputation system for the mixed nodes that run the network.
Okay. And there's heavy VC investment. And investment from the European Commission. What the heck is that? What's the European Commission? I just am going through your website. Oh, Binance is in on this. Oh my goodness. You have some portfolio investors.
Yeah.
Are they all interested in privacy and freedom, or are they just here for the gains?
Well, let's put it this way. If they're here for the gains and the gains involve privacy, then, we're fine.
Okay. So that'd be an interesting conversation then. Yeah.
From our perspective, we're like, if someone wants to invest in privacy because they see that as the next generation of what needs to happen online, that is essentially our mission. So, but I think the important point to make here is we try to have a nice spread of investors, right? So it's like you won't see a kind of geographical region of the world or a specific set of interests that's dominating. So yeah.
I'm just wondering if you have any common investors with WorldCoin now.
Oh, I'm sure we do. Although, actually, let me get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, lucky Chris to have Jaya on. She can give you like all of NIM's basics. So yeah, like the reason we're here, the topic we're here to talk about is basically what came up from Worldcoin and Arkham, which basically seem quite set on replicating the surveillance state and economy, but in a supposedly decentralized form. So in case you didn't know, Arkham's snitch coin concept, as Jaya calls it, for example, uses incentivized surveillance to de-anonymize the blockchain and matches buyers and sellers of on-chain intelligence. On the other hand, Worldcoin proposed the universal basic income, which would be powered by a digital ID system, and that raised a lot of concerns about privacy and surveillance. Even though we did see on social media a lot of people lining up around the orbs to get their eyes scanned. My question is for both of you, basically from Jaya's article, which highlights Worldcoin and Arkham as examples of potentially replicating the surveillance economy in a decentralized form. How can we ensure that the Web3 era moves away from Web2 issues rather than reinforcing them? That was a difficult question, but please feel free to just start about your views on these two projects and generally about how doing this, moving from Web2 to Web3, but how can we be better?
From my perspective, speaking as myself very much now, it's not a huge, the hope with Web3 was that it was going to be different from Web2, right? And I think there's so much evidence now that points to that simply just not really playing out that way. And I think Arkham and WorldCoin are good examples of that. That is just because you run something over a supposedly decentralized network and throw a token at it doesn't mean that it'll necessarily be better, even though that's a model that people have tried for pretty much everything under the sun by now. So it kind of, the main aim here for me is not whether something is Web2 or Web3, but specifically what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So one of the interesting things that, from the very early days of token economics and Web3 industry, from my perspective, was exactly this question of dealing with the economics at the heart of global infrastructures and what, tweaking those economics can actually achieve. So kind of coming back to some of the stuff I said in the beginning around changing the business model around how infrastructure operates, I think is actually a pretty key problem to solve, to shift the incentives away from the surveillance model towards privacy. But as I said, just because it's Web3 doesn't mean it automatically does that, because we can see now that you can engineer incentives and use economic incentives to achieve all kinds of weird behavior, including having people scanning their own irises with a device that they know nothing about. So anything to add on that, Chris? Otherwise, I'll continue into the VC investors of WorldCoin. I do see some shared ones, by the way.
I'm still a little hung up on this. I want to know how you having
okay, let's get into it. Let's get into sure, because
first. Clearly they're big into WorldCoin. They're big into a lot of things that are anti-privacy. They're big into faking it and DeFi and pretending that they favor decentralization when they only favor enough decentralization to fool people. They've been behind scams such as the formation of the DeFi Education Fund. They raided Uniswap's treasury and faked a vote and pulled money out to create this slush fund that's this legal thing that they use to go to Washington and meet with, allegedly, or maybe they buy dinners for Congress people to get favorable legislation passed that doesn't favor privacy and doesn't favor liberty, but favors their bottom line. And that's the case for a lot of these VCs. So how do you reconcile that?
There is no clear way to reconcile that, but I think it's more a matter of understanding quite clearly what game you're entering when you enter the game with VCs. And of course, the bottom line is the bottom line, and that is what they care about. There's part of me that takes a little bit of a kind of a cynical pleasure out of having A16 who literally backed the kind of surveillance capitalist business model of most of Silicon Valley and developed those early models, now having thrown their money behind us. But, it's going in eyes wide open and making sure that, the whole project is not dependent on that type of attitude, but also just understanding that, there is this weird thing about capitalism and about how financial markets operate that fundamentally you care about the bottom line. And as long as you can turn that to your advantage and try and build something that makes sense out of that, it's part of the weird contradictions at this stage.
What about, you have an investment from the European Union?
Yeah.
How does that work?
We do.
What is it, like you're funded by government?
Yeah, we're funded by government. The European Union is another one of those funny beasts that, when you enter into collaboration with these types of institutions, you realize that there's a lot of contradictions that are held in these institutions. So you have a handful of radicals there trying to push one agenda that then keeps being countered by other departments and other people with other agendas. And again, it's a matter of taking advantage of that in the most pragmatic way possible. Europe and the European Commission and European regulators are messing around in this contradictory space very clearly right now. You see, on the one hand, the GDPR come out, and then on the other hand, you have legislation now pushing through client-side scanning, right, to kind of implement spyware in everybody's devices. So institutions don't have a monolithic approach to the world, and it's really about pushing where you can and taking advantage of those contradictions in the best way possible.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm willing to have the conversation, and I don't want to hamstring it with this kind of stuff all the time, but I think that engaging in those kinds of relationships and then making these kinds of claims, it needs to be part of the context, because I totally understand you sound like somebody who's very principled and who really believes what they're saying, but at the same time, when there's investments from the European Union, A16Z, and others that have a history of contradicting those values, it needs to be, the incentives get a little bit misaligned. So I think it's important context for the conversation. And I'm just learning all this as we speak, so if I'm saying anything out of line or wrong, or if you are offended, please feel free to cut into me deeply. But I just wanted to put it out there, because it's kind of a red flag for me.
So that's totally cool. And as you can tell, I'm more than happy to have these conversations because I actually find it quite important to have these conversations. This is all stuff that needs to be fully transparent. It's all stuff that needs to be worked out and is part of solving the problems in my mind. We've taken one route with NIM and the way that we're trying to build things, and it is full of contradictory messiness, but we have a kind of core line in terms of what we're trying to achieve with infrastructure. And so far, we believe that the means that we're using to do that, as messy as it might seem for the outside, is so far not compromising the kind of core mission and core intent.
Let me ask you something about Worldcoin, because I know we're aligned, at least as far as the fact that there's something really not good going on. When I put these ideas out there, the strongest pushback that I get, and the most reasonable pushback I get, is regarding the way that the ZK proofs work and the way that the Worldcoin application functions in that, although I've heard varying reports on whether or not the actual iris scan is saved, custodied by Worldcoin. They say it's not, but then I did see a screenshot of the terms you have to agree to before you get your eye scanned, and you have to kind of forced to opt into some sort of data custody thing. But how would you summarize the real danger of what Worldcoin is doing?
There's a few different kind of layers to that. We can, first of all, I think ZK is starting to be increasingly used as a kind of weird type of privacy washing. It's like this kind of silver bullet or fairy dust where it's like you can kind of continue achieving the consequences of surveillance, or a kind of weird form of surveillance, but privacy washing it by supposedly having some ZK solution that protects people's privacy, but while nevertheless enabling the same types of systems of control. So that kind of definitely bugs me. The other thing is zooming out a little bit. The reason why I wrote about Worldcoin as Doomcoin in this article is because you have this kind of weird state where Sam Altman, of course, runs OpenAI as well. So you have this kind of overarching a single view on the world. Is that you're on the one hand, you're creating a problem, and then on the other hand, you're trying to solve it. It's like you're kind of producing an illness to then like sell the solution in a way. And I'm always super wary of this kind of engineer's approach to global societal issues in a way that tends to kind of turn the whole thing into a monopolistic project at the end of the day. So instead of like saying, okay, so you have OpenAI creating some interesting models, and then maybe they work with let's say like trade unions or other kinds of groups and institutions and civil society groups to try and work out like how is AI actually going to impact them in their lives? How is it going to impact workforces? Is there a way that we can start enabling AI to actually be useful for people in a way that doesn't harm their job security, this, that, whatever? Instead of actually engaging in that work, which basically takes some humility and some deeper understanding of how societies operate, instead of doing all that, it's like, no, let's try and sell another engineering solution by inventing this new kind of UBI coin. So it's like a person that sets himself up as this kind of like hero isolated in a tower, trying to map out everybody else's lives in a way that is like, on the one hand, to my mind, fairly doomed to fail, and on the other hand, is ignoring a huge amount of externalities by not engaging in the real world lives of people with more humility, including, for example, also, just engaging with other UBI projects that are already out there and trying to kind of learn and work with them. So I would say that kind of like singular. So in terms of, the discussion around decentralization and centralization, it's almost like, there's a way of thinking about centralization and decentralization where if you have one singular decentralized system, it's still a singular system, which means there's an insane amount of dependencies. And similarly, I see that with WorldCoin. It's like if you have WorldCoin rolling out in that kind of a way, you're creating like dependencies on a singular system. That a better form of decentralization, to my mind, incorporates a certain amount of diversity of infrastructure, including the types of currencies, remunerations, and so on that we use in our daily lives. So I would say like that's a bit of a meandering answer, not your one-liner, but
no, it's
got lots more.
Making me think, because you're right in that he's sort of creating a problem and then trying to solve it. And the one thing when people look at this type of thing, they tend to assume the best intentions, and they assume that things are going to go the way that they're being proposed. But I mean, there's no entrepreneur that's like Sam Altman who's just sitting there looking at what's right in front of them and totally content with this, right? There's always a bigger plan. There's always more to the dream that's being shared inside the boardroom or inside the inner circle. And I think that you nailed on something really that you put it into words that I hadn't thought of before when you were comparing privacy to control. And I think that I've had a problem with them calling WorldCoin privacy preserving, because is it really privacy preserving if ultimately it can result in a tighter level of control over your life? Are we now entering a phase of the world where you can have total privacy, but also be completely controlled based on the permissions that are set for your particular biometrics, for your particular, the ZK proof that traces back to your iris scan? Like that's what I feel like we passed the threshold now for. We can't just look to privacy anymore to protect us. By the way, I'm not even sure this is private, because one way of looking at it for me has been, if we're moving to a system where we're going to be identified through these ZK proofs that are generated from biometrics or from other things that we cannot separate ourselves from, then are we just replacing the system that we currently have, which is names and numbers, random words basically, or what names are, right? That trace back to us, or numbers like national IDs or social security numbers. We're just replacing that system with a new system that ultimately is going to allow more deeper micromanagement of our activities every day. So is that really still privacy, or do we need to change the terminology? Because I feel like as long as they say, oh, it's private, then nobody's going to stop to think, well, okay, it's private, but is this going to make my life better or worse. So I appreciated that before.
It's part of a kind of deeper kind of research and work around narrative and concepts that I'm doing at the moment, because I noticed this when I was reading the early paper on zero knowledge proofs by Shafti Goldwasser, and I was kind of looking into some of her early talks when she's outlining, what zero knowledge proofs are going to achieve in the future. And she literally talks about this. Like, she literally talks about how zero knowledge proofs are going to pave the way for artificial intelligence, because it will get rid of people's concerns around privacy, and it will enable artificial intelligence to continue to, feed into systems like automated policing and so on and so forth, but while preserving privacy. And I had this like, oh shit moment where I was like, okay, great. We're going to get basically the exact same consequences as we currently have now with surveillance systems, meaning, tightening systems of control, but with this kind of like privacy blanket or privacy washing over it. And not only that, zero knowledge proofs might even make the kind of auditing of those systems even more hard as well. So like, I really think we have a whole new field here that's opening up, where we do need to develop new forms of critique and new deeper levels of understanding and a different set of vocabulary, and maybe even, start talking about something other than privacy entirely.
Well, we're sort of creating our own prison, aren't we? And I know that's said frequently, but in this case, we are really doing it, because going back to the legislative side of things and the regulatory side of things, nobody that's in a lawmaking capability or facility or whatever you want to call it, in a job that involves creating laws, usually elected, is looking at it from this perspective. They're looking at it from the privacy only perspective, and they're being sold a bill of goods mostly by the multi-billion-dollar VCs who are out there ignoring the fact that these are tools of control. There's very few. Now with CBDC, that debate coming up, people are starting to wake up a little bit. You hear the governor of Florida saying, we're banning CBDC, this and that, which you can tell he doesn't fully get it. He's starting to understand that, like, yeah, there's a bigger issue here, but they don't understand what we're talking about right now. So how do we get there? Because my fear is that government and law is actually starting to create a safe harbor for this type of thing to happen. And when you see people like Sam Altman testifying in front of Congress and sort of selling a bill of goods to those folks, you start to realize, wow, we're going to be in a situation where they're actually protected by law, protected by government. Have you thought about the lawmaking side of it?
Yeah, we have actually at NIM more generally, because again, it's kind of been a little bit in response to the GDPR and looking at how some of these things are playing out. And I think you're totally right that, like, just protecting privacy from the perspective of the law actually isn't quite enough to protect the actual principles of what we're trying to achieve here, which go far beyond privacy, right? So the point is not so much like privacy itself, but what does privacy actually enable for people? And what it enables are some really important things like freedom, like dignity, like integrity, security. And if we have privacy regulation that protects privacy, but actually still enables the harms to all these like secondary effects, which are actually what we're trying to achieve when we're protecting privacy, then it makes no sense whatsoever, right? So I do think a shift in focus also from regulators to look more closely at what is it that privacy is actually supposed to achieve, because just protecting privacy is simply not enough. You can protect privacy and still be undermining people's security, integrity, and dignity.
Yeah, so that goes back to like thinking about the EU and central banks of the EU and the US and the World Bank, whoever else is involved with starting to think about CBDC technology and how the next iteration of fiat is going to look. None of them, I don't care what they say, none of them are going to give up or pass on technology that allows for stronger control over the way we spend money. And just to back it up just one step, we live in a world where money equals food, equals clean water, equals shelter, equals medicine. And there's really, for most people, there's no other way to acquire those things without money. right? So we're talking about, when we talk about government control of our money and micromanagement of your money, we're really talking about government micromanagement of how much food you get, how much water you get, what kind of shelter you have, whether you have any at all, what kind of medical care you're going to get, et cetera. So they're never going to pass up on this kind of ability, this kind of technology. When you combine these ideas with like the ZK proofs and the fact that you don't need a name, you don't need a social security number anymore. You can just be recognized by your iris for you are this meat bag human, and you are, this particular iris is connected to this amount of fiat in it. It's connected to this medical history, this vaccination record, this social credit score. They don't even care what your name is. They won't care. It won't matter. You won't have that level, that kind of identity anymore. Your identity is going to be a ZK proof that's connected to all of these various things, and you can never ever escape from that, barring some next level like cyborg shit, right? You might replace eyeballs in the future and stuff like that. But hey, that would be fun to think about in next Twitter space. But it's almost like we can never expect any government to pass up. It's out of the box. So to me, it's more about how do we raise awareness of more people so that we can create a parallel system. Is that the kind of thing that you're thinking about, or do you think that we can still solve it within government?
I'm actually become like extremely agnostic when it comes to organizational forms. And I think it's like weirdly, to get a little bit personal about my own background, I think it's a combination of having just been involved in like so many weird and wonderful groups and associations and organizations and this and that, spanning like anarchist groups through to, spiritual sects and whatever else that I happen to grow up in. So like these are like, what you end up realizing is that oftentimes people who try and build entirely parallel systems and entirely new systems end up replicating a lot of the mistakes of mainstream society over and over again, thinking that somehow by starting from scratch, you're going to be free from all that. But you never are, because we are part of history, all of us together. And so like getting involved in kind of the mess is what's important, and trying to kind of learn from the mess is what's important. Starting from scratch is not always the solution. I mean, it can be, but in my experience, I've just had too many kind of times or seen too many kind of replicated mistakes across these weird groups that I've happened to encounter. So that's like one side of things. And then I think that we have to be extremely pragmatic when we're thinking about organizational forms, right? So there's certain things that like government institutions can do better than free markets. There are certain things that like trade unions do that are like better than like your boss, or do you know what I mean? Like we have all these kind of organizational forms that are like implicit in these organizational forms are a set of incentives that push a specific agenda forward, i.e., the VC agenda, which is, the bottom line, and so on and so forth. It's like going into and engaging with these organizational forms in a way that's pragmatic, that is never fully dependent on one form, but that actually makes use of them in order to achieve a broader societal good, is kind of where I'm coming from. Like I've become super agnostic, super pragmatic, super kind of cynical in a sense about how to bring about change. And cynical in the sense that, in a healthy way, I would say, in the sense that I don't believe in a kind of starting from scratch mentality or running entirely parallel societies mentality. But yeah, I don't know. What's your take, Chris?
Well, I mean, most governments, or all governments that I've seen discuss this tech, they'll say they believe in privacy, but basically it's privacy again between individuals, privacy from everyone except for them. At the end of the day, the governments want to treat you like a criminal until you're proven not a criminal, right? And so they want to know you're not spending money on terrorism. They want to know you're not spending money on drugs. They want to know you're not doing all this stuff.
That's a really good point. So if you don't mind me cutting you off and
let me getting back finish, because I want you to include this in your answer. And not to harp on it, but you have an investment from the European Union. So if the European Union, your investor, comes to you and says, we want to work with you to develop a privacy, air quotes, solution that's going to allow us the access we need to protect the people, but offer them a level of privacy that's going to help them stay private in their day-to-day. Now, is that something that, like, have you already ruled out that type of thing for NIM, or is that a road you would go down since they're a part of your backend?
So in quick answer to your final parts of the question, absolutely not. We would never provide a backdoor to a government. The European Commission invested in early research stages of NIM. And that's kind of generally speaking what government does really well, is investing in early stage research before the VCs come on board to try and achieve that bottom line gain at a quicker pace. So we are not beholden to the European Commission for any kind to deliver anything in particular on that front. So the quick answer to that part of the question is definitely no. And then when it comes to like the incentives of government to pry, I think this is really interesting thing, right? We have this kind of situation right now where fundamentally strong privacy protections is in the best interest of everybody, right? But the problem is that governments are always going to be way too tempted to understand what's going on in their population and spy on everybody. It's ingrained in what they're trying to achieve, right? And what they're supposed to achieve. The same thing goes for companies and corporations, right? And I see this in action. So many companies I come across, it's like the immediate incentive is you want to know what your customer is up to. And of course, the initial motivation is like, oh, but we want to service them better, right? But then it's why do you want to service them better? In order to, it's for the bottom line at the end of the day, right? So government has a kind of spying incentive at its heart. Companies has also the spying incentive, the surveillance incentive at the heart of a lot of business models today. So how do you solve for that? That privacy at the end of the day is in the best interest of everybody for security reasons, but just goes against the ingrained incentives of these two key organizational forms, government and the private sector. And that's why we're trying to do something like NIM, which is, where you shift that model, basically. It's like you want to shift the incentives towards providing privacy being the kind of profitable aspect. So running a node to provide privacy, you make money, you kind of get rid of the incentive to spy. It's a really key point. And I think someone who spells this out really nicely, what the hell is her name? She wrote the book Crypto Politics, and she talks about the kind of geopolitical aspects of this weird contradiction that states find themselves in, which is like, on the one hand, we want to secure our infrastructures because our infrastructures have to be secure from attacks by foreign powers. But on the other hand, we want to insert backdoors into an infrastructure so we understand what people are up to. But as soon as you open a backdoor not just to your own security agencies, but to lots of others as well. So there is that inherent contradiction, and you see that playing out all the time in government and government debates. And again, most recently, of course, with the huge debates going on in Europe and the UK right now around client-side scanning. And that is one of the kind of key lines. You have like, Apple, WhatsApp, and Signal who are threatening to pull their services out of the UK entirely in response to client-side scanning because it compromises the basic security of these services and devices. So yeah, I think there's like a weird contradiction at the heart of government. And that's what I mean when I say that, it's a matter of finding the right allies in government to kind of push the privacy agenda forward.
Can you give me like an example of how NIM would work with regard to just like with Bitcoin, for example? How do you route just top level, like how do you route Bitcoin transaction through NIM for privacy?
So we've actually already got integrations with the Electrum wallet and Blockstream Green wallet. So you can use NIM Connect, and essentially what NIM Connect does is it takes the traffic from your wallet, routes the transaction traffic through the mixnet before it kind of hits the Bitcoin blockchain, and it basically just protects traffic in transit and makes sure that it can't be traced. I mean, that's the kind of super quick.
During that routing, it's moving from the app that you're using to the NIM blockchain somehow getting run through by a validator.
No. So again, you have to distinguish between, there's like two key parts to the NIM architecture, right? We've got the mixnet and then we've got the blockchain. The blockchain is almost like the backbone, you can think of it, of the architecture, but it has nothing to do with user traffic. So the blockchain is literally just there to hold the topology of the nodes operating the mixnet. So you have validators running the blockchain. They just service the smart contracts that operate, that have the topology of nodes, a reward system for the mixnet. Then you have the mixnet itself, which is completely, think of it as a separate system to the blockchain. the mixnet comprised of mixed nodes, not validators, and those mixed nodes mix your traffic as it goes through the network.
Okay. How many nodes are there?
Right now, about 500.
Okay. And
so we're doing like a kind of step-by-step scaling up of the mixnet, because if you have like 10,000 nodes right now, but not enough people paying for traffic going through, then of course, there's no incentive for the nodes to actually operate. So you want to scale the mixnet as the usability scales, basically.
And the data that's moving through the nodes back to the Bitcoin blockchain in this example, it's all moving through encrypted end to end, or how does that work?
Yeah, so to take it like step by step. So what NIM Connect does is it takes the traffic, encrypts it in what's called a Sphinx encryption, which is a little bit similar to kind of onion routing, except what Sphinx encryption does is it encrypts each packet in several layers of encryption and makes each packet look exactly the same in terms of size as well. So the traffic coming out of your device will all be Sphinx encrypted end to end and will look completely indistinguishable from other mixnet users' traffic. That then goes through a service provider, which connects you to, whatever wallet that you're using, depending on if it's browser-based or whatever else. And then, your wallet, whatever pings the Bitcoin blockchain, and it goes through these different hops, goes through these 3 layers of the mixnet, comes out the other end, and then gets decrypted in the final hop. That was a bit of a kind of muddled explanation, but
is it decreasing the trustlessness of Bitcoin transaction in any way? And if so, like what ways?
If it's decreasing the trustlessness,
that's a bad way of putting it. Do I have to trust everybody to believe that I'm remaining completely private with this flow? Like, do I have to put my trust in the node operators? Well, basically that would be it, because it's not validators in that.
It's fully trustless. So essentially all the nodes know. So similar to onion routing, your Sphinx encrypted packet hits the first mixed node, right? What that mixed node does is they unwrap the first layer of this Sphinx encryption, and all they can see is where the next hop needs to go. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, in that sense, the actual operators have no clue what the final destination is or where this packet has come from.
Okay. There's got to be a small chance that it's going to fail, right?
Like anything we try and do in this world.
Right. But aside from a failure, basically, where just it stalls out, is there any other negative outcome possible with a crypto transaction?
I would say there's no negative outcome in the sense that, like, there's no additional risk that's being added here. The only thing that's being added here is like a little bit of latency, and that's a bit of an annoyance. But for crypto transactions, that's not an issue whatsoever. It's only an issue if you want to like stream stuff over the mixnet. But in terms of compromising trustlessness, security, there is absolutely no additional compromise there. In fact, quite the opposite, because right now the problem with crypto transactions, and in fact the problem with decentralized infrastructures more generally, is like when you have a decentralized infrastructure, by its very nature, you have a lot of traffic pinging over open networks, right? Whether it's like validators that need to coordinate amongst each other to achieve consensus in, Ethereum proof of stake, or whether it's, peer-to-peer transaction broadcasts, all that is happening over open networks. And so, and that is a serious security risk, because all that can be traced and all that can be used to de-anonymize yourself. So, from there on, everything else is an improvement, right? If you use a VPN, okay, minor improvement. If you use a Tor, massively, more improvement there. And then with a mixnet, it's pretty bulletproof.
Okay, great. Well, the homework I have to do is to convince myself that basically that NIM can turn evil. I think that
your assessment on that. Let's keep the conversation.
I mean, I'll do a cursory sort of look, but I mean, it would be good to. I mean, that would be, my eyes always go directly to where's the money coming from, because that's a lot of, like I said, as principle driven as you may be, like at the end of the day, investors are going to come back looking for a return. And they're going to have their own priorities. And I'm sure you've already gotten the phone calls that are uncomfortable from some of these VCs. So, at the end of the day, that's really like, this is the opposite of other open source projects that I'm typically like kind of drawn towards, the ones that are bootstrapped and sort of have clear intention. Maybe they're even anonymous, and they find ways to make it so that they can't be evil with it. I guess like a good example is Tornado Cash, even though they kind of got nuked by the government. But they got nuked by the government because they weren't working with the government. So it's like, it was a big part of it. I would like to, it might be good to learn more about that and how the thing can evolve. But I definitely appreciate your takes on WorldCoin and privacy and versus control and all that kind of stuff. And I think that this sounds like a really cool project I need to learn more about.
Yeah, well, it's been good chatting with you as well. And honestly, like from my perspective, I do like to work through the difficulties and the messy side of things. Like I said, we've chosen to go one way with NIM, and absolutely have full respect to people who've chosen for clean ways in terms of investment and funding and so on. I think from my perspective, again, it was a little bit this, I can only speak for myself at this point when I'm saying this, but having been involved with a lot of projects that have severe, lack of funding and maybe had like all the right opinions, but don't ever get messy and therefore kind of reach a certain kind of ceiling in terms of like what they manage to achieve when it comes to their core mission. I am keen to try a different angle where, sure, there are compromises here and there, but in terms of the kind of core technology that's being built out, that's like unflinching. It's like, we're building a strong privacy system with no backdoors. We're taking quite a different funding model to Tor, quite a different funding model to some other open source projects, but we are open source. We trust this. We're decentralized.
Awesome. No, appreciate that. Thanks for inviting me out for a chat.
If you do see some evidence of evil creeping up, feel free to reach out.
Okay.
Yes, please do. And also just to mention, like NIM Connect is also integrated with the Monero wallet that you mentioned at the beginning, and also Telegram Messenger. So that's something as well. And yeah, thank you guys for the great back and forth. It was very chill on my side. I didn't have to ask any questions, but that was great. Thank you, Chris, for challenging our views and asking more about NIM. I think it's really insightful for everyone listening to this space, and also later on we'll post the recording on YouTube as well. So yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on, and I hope you had a good time for this past hour.
Right on. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.